A quick word from today's sponsors. For all you content creators, small business owners, and entrepreneurs, did you know that creating an income online or adding a new revenue stream to your business has never been easier? Have you ever considered taking your knowledge, skills, and expertise and converting it into a course that you can sell online? Well, introducing LearnWorlds. LearnWorlds makes it easy to create, host, and sell beautiful online courses that have an impact. With LearnWorld's intuitive platform and a wealth of resources to educate yourself, you're only a few steps away from building a thriving online business in the booming knowledge economy. Visit trylearnworlds.com to start your free 30-day trial, or follow the link in the episode description to start building your course today. Hello listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. Today we are introducing a new group that has not been discussed on the show previously. This is an introduction to that group with hopes of follow-up interviews in the future. Here is Guy telling us about Iglesia ni Cristo. Hi Guy, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today and agreeing to share your story. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to our listeners?
Hi, I'm Guy. I am a former Iglesia ni Cristo member, and thank you for having me on the show.
It's a privilege to have you here. This is the first time we're speaking about this, so I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about this movement. It's not something I'd come across until people started reaching out to me. So myself and the listeners are going to be enlightened today. And this movement can be shortened to INC for short.
I personally use INC.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because Inc. I think of incorporated when people say that.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So INC is the name of the movement that we're going to be discussing today. And can you just tell me and the listeners a little bit about what this movement is, where it's based, where it started?
Okay. I guess we can start with its creation story. It was started in the Philippines around 1914. I mean, that's how the story goes.
Okay.
There was a guy named Felix Y. Manalo who apparently locked himself up in his room for 3 days and read the Bible. And after that 3 days, he came out and proclaimed himself as the last messenger of God.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And he coincided this with the outbreak of World War I, and he used that as like a basis point for the justification of why the Iglesia ni Cristo is the ultimate religion, is the one that everyone should be joining in order to be saved and to go to heaven.
And do you think at that time, I mean, given that it was such a huge world event taking place, that people would have bought into his story a bit more at that time, given the state that the world was in?
I'd like to think so. I mean, I'm trying to put myself in the mind of like a Filipino person around that time, when there's like a clash, not only with what's going on with the rest of the world, but also it's a time of post Spanish War and American War, trying to conquer the Philippine islands.
And if it started in 1914 and is still something that exists today, I'm guessing that there are second, third, fourth generation members that are a part of this movement.
Definitely, yes. One example is with its leadership. I think it's but I don't know the word, when it's like passed down from son to son. But it's basically, the Felix Manala's lineage. That's the quote unquote church administration.
Okay, interesting. And that position would always fall to a man and never a woman.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's how it's been.
If this is something that's been around for so long, is it something that moved out of the Philippines at any point? Is it kind of restricted to the Philippines, or has it immigrated to different countries? And do we know roughly how many members this movement could have within its fold?
I don't think there's any way of figuring out the exact numbers from an outside perspective looking in. But this definitely exploded. It's worldwide. I have memories as a child of going around the United States, going around the world, and still being able to go to houses of worship and it be the same religion. You know, there was like directories that were made in the Pasuka magazine. Um, yeah, I'm thinking like, oh, these are days of print before the internet and everything. Of course, they would have them, you know. But yeah, it amazed me even as a child that it was so organized and it spread rapidly and quickly.
I suppose as well, you've got the First World War in 1914, but there is also a Second World War that takes place not long after. And there's been so many things that have happened, like cataclysmic events that have happened across the world since 1914, that the message can always be reinforced one way or another. And I'm assuming that's the same with a lot of other movements as well. I know a lot of high controlling groups have taken the coronavirus pandemic and used that to strengthen their message of the end times and
Oh yeah.
why religion needs to be pulling together more than ever, and you know the chosen ones need to come forward now, otherwise there could be severe consequences. So it's certainly interesting that was the moment in history that this Felix decided to start his particular group. And how did you find yourself in INC?
I was born into this cult and didn't really have a choice in that matter.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when you were born into the movement, did your parents join or was it your grandparents?
Um, I it was pretty much my dad's side of the family
Okay.
that was like controlling of it mostly. My mom was born Catholic, and she converted in when she met my dad, and then they had me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And do you know how your parents actually met one another?
Actually, I don't. I really don't. I should ask my mom that.
Yeah, I think it's always
Yeah.
interesting to know where people's kind of what their stories are, especially when it comes to converting from one religion to another.
Yeah.
So it would certainly be an interesting conversation to have with your mum, I think. And were you the only child that they went on to have, or do you have brothers and sisters?
I have a younger brother, but the age gap is 8 years.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So they waited a little while for their other child.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, okay. And you said that it was mostly your father's side that were involved in INC. So what are the beliefs and practices of this group? How
Oh,
would you summarize the INC?
there's a lot, you know, like
Yeah,
yeah.
you start wherever and you
Yeah.
go wherever.
In parentheses, I have where do I begin? Because it's so unique. But I personally call it like a gross mishandling of Christianity.
Okay.
Um, it's, as Wikipedia puts it, non-Trinitarian, which means you know the concept of the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. There's a God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. That's all one thing. The Iglesia Cristo does not believe in that. That they are three separate beings. That God the Father is the Almighty God. That Jesus was a man, and they barely touch on this the concept of a Holy Spirit.
Okay. Okay. And when you're a part of this movement in your particular congregation, how often were you expected to meet and what activities were you involved in growing up with the church?
We were expected to meet at least twice a week, once on a Sunday and once in the midweek, like usually on a Wednesday or a Thursday.
And were you educated at home, or did you attend public school?
Um, I attended private school for the most part. I had a Catholic preschool,
Okay.
and then I went to a day school, and then we moved. Then I went to public school for a year. Then I went to a private Catholic school for middle school, and then public school for high school and
Okay, so a
uni.
nice
Yeah,
mixture
yeah,
there of
yes, it
different
is.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And of all of those different institutions that you spent time within, were you ever open about your religion and your upbringing, or was it something that you kind of kept to yourself?
I kept it to myself because I even knew at a young age that it's different. The Iglesias are different in how they view Christianity. And especially as a Filipino person, like it's definitely different. Like I felt different from like other uh, peers who did practice Christianity and other Filipino kids who were in Iglesia.
And do you think that this is something that impacted your childhood from other typical children?
Oh yeah, like it was hard to make friends, not only with other Filipino kids, but even within the the church itself. Like it was difficult for me.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that is one of the questions on the list, which is what is it like for a child to be in this movement? And I guess that's the first sort of insight into what it must be like being an INC member and attending private school, especially a Catholic school, and not feeling like you can be honest about your heritage and your upbringing. Um, did you have other similar age children in your congregation that you could connect with?
Before I moved, yeah, and then after we moved, not so much.
Okay.
Probably because I wasn't a choir member. I wasn't. Neither were my parents, so they weren't. The churches are very cliquey. You know, um, like the choir members, they're always seen in the worship services, so they get you know all the attention and all that.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Um,
So if you were to be a member of the choir, you think that your experience may have been slightly different growing up?
definitely. Oh, definitely. Especially if you were an officer, because you were expected to, at least for choir members, to go to practices all the time. Um, and if you're going to practice all the time, you're hanging out with all your other fellow INC friends. But
Well, and you just said the word officer there. So are there
uh,
different titles for different levels within the church?
oh yeah, yes. How can I organize this? Well, there's in each congregation there was a resident minister, and they usually would lead the sermons twice a week.
Okay.
Um, I guess under the resident minister, there would be overseers, and they were the ones who would, make sure that members would attend these worship services on their biweekly basis. There were also overseers were also like deacons and deaconesses.
Okay.
Um, they would help usher in members as they would come in and congregate for the worship services. Um, and usually these gatherings were split, men on the left side, women on the right side, and then
Okay.
there would be a cry room for young babies in the back. Let's see, what else can I say about the officers? There's like a secretariat where they would keep track of members who would come in, because we had little name tags that we would have to turn over right before going into the building, and that's a way that they would keep track of the attendance. There was also like finance officers who would count the offerings after every worship service. And then there's the choir that would sit behind the resident minister in the front.
And are any of these positions, do you know if any of these positions are paid at all, or are they all on a voluntary basis?
I'll, I like to think that they're mostly volunteer. I don't know if ministers are paid or not. I'm unsure of that.
It's interesting that the point you made about the overseers making sure that people attend. What does it look like if you don't attend? Are they people are they making phone calls or sending out text messages? What have you ever experienced that yourself?
Yeah, they would, reach out via phone call, ask, "Hey, what's up? We didn't see you on Sunday, blah blah blah." And then sometimes they go over and visit, or they'd ask to visit the people's residences and just check in on them. We even did that at the children level as well. Like if a kid didn't come up, we would have to call them up, ask what's wrong.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
And then the money is counted. Is the money counted whilst everybody's still in attendance, or is that something that's done afterwards? Because that seems like really strange.
Yeah, it's done afterwards. If I could go into the structure of how the worship service goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
Okay. So usually doors open. Let's say that worship service starts at 7:30. So doors would open at 7. Give half an hour time. During that time, people would come in. Some songs or hymns would be sung, and then doors would close. Then we go into more singing. I think there's like 4 songs that are sung.
Okay.
Then there's a prayer. There's a prayer before the lesson, and then there's a song, and then the resident minister comes up, gives the sermon for how long that he wants to speak. Then there's another prayer, and then there's the offering. Then the deacons and deaconesses, they collect an offering from everybody in their little pouches. Then they put them in a large box that's in the middle of the room, the worship service. And then there's another prayer. Then there's the doxology, another prayer, and then closing announcements, and then everyone leaves.
Okay. And what are children expected to do at this time? Do you just carry out you join in with the prayers and everything like that?
Yeah. Well, typically kids would join the adult services, but they also have their own separate children's worship service. That would be usually held once a week on Sundays after the adult worship services.
Okay, interesting. And is INC, it was born in the Philippines. Would you say that's one of the main branches of religion found in the Philippines at this time, or is it still quite is it still seemed as something quite new?
I don't think it's considered new-ish anymore. I always describe myself as the quote-unquote lucky 1% of Filipinos that's Iglesia, because they're mostly Catholic or Protestant or Islam. And here's the Iglesia people. But like every single Filipino parent that I met, or like I would go up to another Filipino kid at school, and then they would ask their parents about Iglesia, and then there's like this fear of knowing that there's something off with Iglesia ni Cristo from like all the other older generations of Filipinos.
It's interesting that existed, but the movement is still bringing in people today. Do you think it's growing in numbers or shrinking?
I don't know. I can't put an answer to that with the whole COVID thing going on, because I'm pretty sure that's hampering their worship services, not just this religion but all other religions. I know I I wish I could find concrete proof that there's a tie with the Iglesia ni Cristo and the Philippine government. Because I always read like news articles that there's rumors that the president of the Philippines is in cahoots with the INC somehow in some way.
It's often speculated when a religious group has ties with the government that that's
Uh,
despite abuse allegations that come out, that's often the way they manage to keep their tax exempt status, and kind of use their money to buy extensive properties in the area,
right,
and things like
right.
that. Do you think that's something that the INC could be involved in?
It's very plausible, especially with how much money that they're taking in. They're always building these. To me, they look tacky. Houses of worship in the Philippines, but the Philippines is a third world country, and poverty's rampant and everything. And if all this money is coming in just to build these buildings, why isn't it being spent to help the Philippine people?
Right. Yeah. 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 And when you were growing up, do you have a rough estimate of the size of your congregation that you would attend?
It would depend which congregation. Honest, like some were very small. The one I went to in college was probably like what 100, 200 people. Um, and I know others would house at least thousands of
Wow,
people.
okay.
Yeah,
At one time.
yeah,
Wow, that must be difficult for people during this pandemic to get together and have congregations of that size. I wonder how they're managing that.
yeah.
Maybe online services, or perhaps just never stopped having the services anyway, despite the
Mm-hmm.
risks.
There's, I know the Iglesia also have like a TV channel that they would use.
Oh, to
Yeah.
spread their message, like
Mm-hmm.
sort of like their propaganda.
Yeah.
Wow, what did that look like?
I never watched it because we never
No,
got the channels over here.
no. Do you think it's
Yeah.
like a televangelist sort of American style
That,
televangelist shows?
that's what I actually no, I can't say because I've never seen one of those shows either. But I imagine it to be like the same structure as a worship service where um, there would be a minister talking and then they oh actually now I'm getting vague memories back of like the ministers talking and then there would
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
be like verses that would come up on the screen
Oh, for people to sing along with
to
and
sing.
stuff. Interesting.
Right.
Okay. And what were there any other types of propaganda that you know of, like newsletters or books, or any types of reading materials, posters?
Yeah. They had their Pasugo magazine that was printed. I'm not sure if they still print that anymore. Um, I think they had a TV station. I don't know what else that they would be using. But I'd imagine that they would have like a Facebook account and Instagram
Oh, right,
and all
things like
that
that. Yeah,
probably.
yeah, yeah.
That
And do you think that they're using those same methods to recruit people, or is that purely just to kind of speak with their followers, the TV channel and things like that?
probably both. That's their big shtick, always to bear fruits, always to be recruiting.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So is that something that you were encouraged to do at any point?
At least, I think that's like a life goal of any Iglesia member was to bear a fruit, to convert someone into the Iglesia ni Cristo.
How much fruit did you bear?
None.
Okay, that's
Yes.
always an interesting question, because
Yeah.
sometimes people will say, "Oh, 2 or 3," and they're still involved, but I'm not. And then there's always
Yeah.
that kind of question of
Yeah.
asking,
Like,
what level of responsibility or guilt might you feel as a
yeah.
person who brought somebody else in? So in terms of the movement itself, were you restricted with anything like your diet or clothing or leisure time and activities?
We were expected to wear like Sunday's best, keep our hair at least for the men, like keep our hair short. Women had to, wear dresses and skirts that weren't too short. Um, but the time, oh my gosh, the like especially if you were an officer, you were expected to give basically your whole Sunday to the church, even for unexpected things. Like sometimes like a meeting would be called, and you were expected to go regardless of whatever schedule you had for the rest of the day.
And this sounds like something that you're speaking about from personal experience. So, was an officer that a title that you held at one point?
Yeah, I was a CWS officer. I helped out with the children's worship services. So I would help lead the kids in, make sure that they were quote unquote praying properly. I'd help collect the kids' offerings. I also helped count those offerings afterwards. That was the extent of my officer duties.
And so children are expected to bring to bring tithe as well.
Yeah, they were.
Okay, so parents would give the children money and then say, make sure you hand
Here.
this in at church.
Yes. Yep.
And how much money on average, would each child bring?
$1.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just
okay.
$1. They really wanted it in bills. We always they didn't want coins. Yeah, I remember that.
What was the reaction if there were coins brought in?
Oh, we would try to exchange them.
Oh, okay.
Basically.
Okay. And what is the approach of this movement towards the LGBTQIA community?
I feel like that they would not be very accepting of people of the gay community. I never really met someone who was Iglesia and also identified as LGBTQ.
Okay.
But, yeah, I can imagine that it is not very pretty.
And what kind of gives you that idea?
Just because Iglesia's teachings are very super conservative, extremely strict, very traditional in the sense of a Christian standpoint. That homosexuality is a huge sin.
Okay.
And that a gay person is living their life wrong, that sort of thing.
A quick word from this week's sponsors. The Indie Drop-In Network has something special for listeners, a podcast called Scary Time. But Scary Time isn't like most podcasts. This show actually hosts different content creators each week, and these creators are bringing a whole load of different subjects to the table. These subjects include conspiracies, stories of the paranormal, and even dystopian fictional tales of the end of the world. One of my favourite episodes is by a podcast called Curly Conspiracies, where hosts Brooke and Holly discuss the strange events surrounding Japan Airlines Flight 1628. Looking for some new and exciting content? Scary Time stays fresh and relevant each week by releasing content from different creators. Find Scary Time today on Apple Podcasts or click the link in the show description to listen today. I mean, I've been on the subreddit that any of the listeners can go and visit. I think there's quite a community there as well. It's quite a large subreddit, and it's growing at a fast rate if you look at the statistics that are posted. r/x/Iglesia near Cristo, which you can find, and I'll post in the episode description as well. And there are often posts every day that question why the Philippines still let INC exist. People that say, I'm trying to leave the cult. How do I leave the cult? And throwing those words around. And I was just wondering what notable experiences you've had within this movement that would lead you to label it as a cult.
It's not really one experience, one specific scenario or instance. Like for me, I knew at a young age there was something wrong with this church. How something could foster so much hate and vile ominosity against other religions. It didn't make sense to me as a kid how, there were nice Catholic nuns teaching me colors and how to write, how my grandmother was like the kindest person in the world, and the Iglesia de Cristo was saying no, she's not going to be saved and she's not going to go to heaven. It didn't make sense to me how, like, if you had never heard of it, you never hear of the Iglesia de Cristo, then you won't be saved. And it didn't make sense to me how people born before 1914 would not be saved.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, I didn't even consider that. That didn't even cross my mind.
Yeah.
So there was some kind of uncomfortable rhetoric being thrown around about other religions and where they stand in the eyes of INC.
Oh yeah, like I have memories of like the minister saying the Catholics are evil, the Protestants are evil, like don't follow them.
And what would be the consequences if you were to follow them?
I'm guessing, like you'd be shunned or you'd be thrown into the lake of fire.
Right. Okay. So is that kind of imagery something that was explained often to you as a child growing up?
Yeah. I'm guessing, it was used in other religions. The fear of going to hell is your reason to obey the church administration, to obey your elders in the church.
And when you were moved into the position of officer, is this something that you applied for? Is it something that you were interested in doing, or is it an obligation that you feel you're kind of pressured into at any point?
There's some pressure. There's some sort of like community pressure to have an office to help out with the church. I personally did it out of my own volition. I believe kids are the future, so what better way than help out the kids?
Right. Yep. And are you approached by the resident minister who says, like, I would like you to take up the position of officer, or do you approach the resident minister and say, this is something I would like to do?
Yeah, you just go up to whoever's like in charge of whichever section, and then you just ask, and then they start training you.
Oh, you have to be trained for the role. It's not something you can just start doing.
I mean, but that's basically what happens. You basically, just kind of jump into it in a sense. And
when you became involved as an officer, did this change your view even more of INC, or did it make it seem better or worse, or did it not change anything at all?
It didn't change anything at all. If anything, it just gave me something to do.
Right. Okay. And I think it was yourself I was speaking to about the month of July, and yes, how that's poignant with INC. And I was just wondering if you could talk us through what July means for the religion.
Right. Well, okay. July is also, it's like a month of reflection for Iglesia de Cristo members, in that it's the remembrance of the emergence of the church, with the whole World War I thing. There's special celebrations within the church calendar year, and there's typically three notable events. There's the Holy Supper, which is like the equivalent of an Easter gathering. There's the church anniversary that's held in July, and then there's the year-end Thanksgiving, held at the end of the year.
And are you expected to attend church more during these kind of high holiday periods?
Definitely. At least, go to worship service at least the week before just to mentally prepare yourself and all that. Um, I know choir members would have like month-long practices just to prepare for these events.
Okay, and choir members would be expected to attend sort of how many times a week do you think?
I guess it would depend, but I feel like practices were probably held twice a week, I think. I'm not
Twice a
sure.
week. Okay, okay.
Maybe.
So, how old were you when you decided to leave INC, and what was the reason behind that decision?
Um, this was in my second year of college, and it's a very personal story.
Okay, okay.
Um, my dad found out that my mom was cheating on him, and he told me, and that was like a big topsy-turvy thing,
Okay.
especially, where, I grew up believing that my parents were infallible because, that's just how our household was run. Um, and then all of a sudden, this happens. My mom commits a sin. And then I'm going up to, other ministers, other deacons and deaconesses where I was attending, and they were all giving me the same answer of comfort that I should just keep praying, that my mom will be saved and everything. And that didn't sit well with me. That didn't compute well. How could this religion that's so strict and so, it like follows whatever teachings are in the Bible verbatim. They're very literal about how they translate things.
Okay.
How would my mom still be saved if she committed this grave sin?
Mm-hmm.
And that was like my final thing. Like if there was no comfort in me seeking out or finding comfort from everyone else in the Iglesia, then I'm not going to find comfort at all.
And how did you approach this decision with your parents? Did your mum did your mum remain in the marriage with your father? Because obviously, if one of them decides to leave the movement,
Yeah.
then that would kind of give you a foothold to follow them away, or is it a decision that you made independently?
It's a decision I made independently. My brother and my younger brother are also no longer part of the 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 cult. But I know that divorce is not believed in, and I think technically my parents are legally separated. They're not divorced on paper.
Okay, and what reason is that for? Is that for your father's status in the church?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I suppose that's
Yeah. These are things I need to, talk more with my mom about.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. It'll be interesting to have these conversations with her. Do you think it's something you can approach with your mom?
Yeah, we're getting better. Our relationship, as mother child, it was strained, but I think we're both in the healing process, especially after being in this cult.
And how long has it been since you left the movement?
Well, it's been like 10 years, I think.
And what has your life been like since you moved away from the church?
It feels a lot more peaceful, honestly. Like sometimes I still find myself wondering what the heck am I going to do with my time because it feels like I have so much time now. But I like it. It is peaceful. It's quiet, and I feel more free to be able to do what I personally want to do. That was one of the bigger struggles for me personally, like trying to figure out what the heck am I going to do with my life? What should, quote unquote, should I be doing in my life? Turns out I could just choose whatever, and that'll be okay.
Yeah, and do you get to have nice long lions on a Sunday morning?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I love sleeping in on Sundays.
Yeah, sleeping in is the best thing. And I
Yeah.
can't imagine the pressure of having, especially when you're growing up, because when you're a teenager, you're so tired all the time,
Oh yeah.
just because your body's growing and your hormones are all
Oh
over
my
the
God.
place and you're in
Hmm.
school and you're learning loads and there's so much pressure around exams and everything. I can't imagine having 2 days a week where you get to sleep in and one of those days actually is dedicated to something that you for a long time have been skeptical about, and you have to leave your nice warm bed to go and
Oh yeah.
spend the whole day somewhere you don't really want to be.
There there was one one officers meeting that we had. And I was reminded of this when you spoke about being a teenager, but this was like in the high time of advanced placement testing and SAT testing for me. And, I was burnt out. But, I was also doing extracurricular activities with my high school, but I was so burnt out that day. And I remember having to sit through another officers meeting and I was caught, like dozing off because I just physically couldn't stay awake. And I was reprimanded for that. Even though like they keep telling us, we should be high academic achievers and doing well in our school. And I'm like, I'm in my mind, I was like, I'm sleepy and tired because I'm trying to do well in school and all that.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's like no matter what, if you weren't performing to whatever church administration standards they set, then you weren't performing well at all.
And that's interesting, that level of pressure. It's enough to make anybody want to skip one or two services, but then you have the pressure of overseers getting in touch saying, oh, where were you the other week? We
Yeah.
missed you. We missed you at the service. Is there anything we can help you with? And you mentioned that your relationship with your mum is getting better now. Where do you stand with your father?
I It's very strained. Um, I haven't spoken to him in over a year.
Okay.
Um, and I can still see myself not talking with him. Like I just all of a sudden just decided not to have contact with him anymore.
Does
Because
that come from like a place of him pressuring you about his religious beliefs?
he did send me a, a Bible verse unsolicited at the start of the coronavirus. And I told him,
Right.
don't do that. Don't do that to me. But then I kept thinking he's going to be stuck in that mindset for the rest of his life. And I don't know if I want to keep that around in my life.
Hmm. Hmm. That must be difficult for him. I wonder if there's any sort of level of pressure on your father being sort of, like a separated man without his children, still trying to
Yeah,
hold on to his faith in the
right.
INC. I don't know, is that something that you've sat down and thought about?
I have at times, the idea of estranged parents and all that.
Yeah.
Uh, maybe one
Especially the
day.
pressure
uh,
that comes with having such an involved family in the church, like
mhm,
you described that your father's side of the family seem to be the ones that are the driving force behind your father and mother being involved in the church, and so I wonder if that plays a part in your father's decision to stay as well.
yeah, probably. He also was born in the church. Uh, he's the youngest of his family, and I'm pretty sure it's also family obligation to stay in.
Hmm. Hmm. And where do you stand now in terms of religion? Do you have a religious affiliation at all?
No, I'm not practicing any religion right now. Um, that's all. I feel like that's going to be a question that's always going to be, lurking in the back of my mind. Is there a God? Is there not a God?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Do you ever find that when you're going to do something that would have been questioned by the church, that you take a second to be like, oh, what will be the consequences if I go and drink this alcohol or whatever it might be?
not as much anymore. Like,
I always think
yeah,
if you've been born into a movement and then you move away from it, there must be such a long period of time where you second guess your decisions because you're scared of the biblical consequences
right.
of what could happen.
Yeah. I feel like I've gone past that. Like the more I do quote unquote sinful things, then I guess the easier it gets. Just the more that I accept, oh, this is my decision that I make. I'm gonna live with it. Ta-da.
And everything seems to
And
be going
everything's
okay so far.
yeah.
So do you find yourself now having relationships and friendships with sort of worldly people,
Oh,
are like on the outside of INC that maybe associate with different religions or no religion at all?
I like to think of myself as somebody who gets along very well with everybody
Hmm.
in INC or not.
Yeah. Are you still in touch with anybody that you went to INC with?
It's funny because I did reach out to one person that I met in college. Um, it was totally random because um, when we met, it was we were in the same dorm room hall together, and in my mind, I'm just like, wow, what the heck are the chances of
Yeah,
finding
wow.
another person? Yeah, this person's always stuck out to me as an interesting one because we were so open with each other when we first met. But I did reach out to her just to check in with her and everything. But it also feels like that she's deep within it as well.
Right, okay, okay. So is that something you think if you wanted to pursue a further friendship might have a strain on that?
Yes, yeah. Just because there's always her thought of trying to bring me back into
Hmm.
the church and everything.
And it's difficult that as well because she probably genuinely worries about you not
Yeah,
being involved in the church and the consequences that that might have on you and your soul and the afterlife and all of these things that come with religious doctrine. So her heart's probably in the right place, but for the wrong
but,
reasons.
right.
And it's hard to sit down and have one of those discussions. They always say, oh, don't bring up religion at the dinner table. So she would
Yeah,
say, this is how I feel, and you would say, but this is how I feel. And it's hard to know where that common ground is because both of you feel in your own right
right.
that you're correct, I
Right.
suppose.
Yeah, but again, like it's being comfortable with whatever decision I make for my life. And I made the decision to leave and I'm comfortable with that and I'm happier for that.
Hmm. Hmm. How did that conversation go with your parents when you said, this is
Oh,
not something that I want to do anymore?
it was really difficult to bring up at first. Um, I only brought it up with my mom and my dad. I didn't even bring it up with the rest of my dad's family. I just up and left.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it was hard to find the courage to say, hey, I don't believe in the Iglesia ni Cristo. I don't believe in this church. I never have, etc.
Wow.
Um, yeah, it. I think my dad took it all right. Like he didn't seem unfazed or anything. Neither did my mom. Never how long ago I brought it up.
That's interesting, isn't it? That they
Yeah,
didn't really have a reaction. That makes me
yeah.
wonder if they kind of maybe feel the same way.
Probably. Like I'm pretty sure that like I'm putting myself in my mom's shoes through, like growing up with me and everything, and she's stuck in this cult, stuck in a marriage where the male is the 100% decision maker and she doesn't have much say, so she feels trapped in this. She's had two kids, and then she's still trapped. Nothing's changed. Nothing's getting happier for her. So, I can understand why she did what she did.
Yeah, I always say this, but it's hard for me to understand the religious movements that still have such attention around the patriarchal systems, because there's such a strive towards equal rights in this kind of day and age, and I am speaking about my experience over here in England, and things I read in the news from America and Canada and Australia and sort of the Western world. So I don't know what the culture is like in the Philippines in terms of men and women and their relationship with each other and society and stuff. I mean, is that something that you can shed some light on?
That's something I'm learning about as I'm trying to learn more about my Filipino American identity, because I didn't have much of it growing up. But from what I've read, in Philippine culture, there is this sort of, 50-50, that men do some work, and women do some work, and there's equal amounts of that. That's already built into the history. Like there's long histories of women holding positions of importance and all that.
But sort of INC is not, it's not something that seems to incorporate too much.
Right.
Interesting. I do have a couple of other interviews lined up with other INC members or ex-INC members. So I'll be interested to see if they can kind of shed some more light and give some more perspective on that specifically. But I always just say that I don't understand the religious movements that are working really hard to recruit more members and to convert more members, and then they still have the women sitting on one side and the men sitting on the other, and they still don't accept anybody from the LGBT community, and they still say that you can't go on a date without a chaperone, and you're not allowed to hold hands and things like that. And I don't know, it's just really hard for me to understand why somebody would be drawn in, or why those things would sound appealing. I don't know, it's just, for me personally, it's just something that I really struggle to wrap my brain around. These movements don't seem to be moving forward with the times.
Right.
So you were nodding along there when I was talking about chaperones with dating and stuff. Is that something that happens in INC?
You were expected to only date within the church. You couldn't have lingering eyes for people outside, or if you did, you'd have to convert them.
Right. So if you were to go to your mum and dad and say, look, I'm thinking about marrying this person, but they're not INC, what would they have said at the time if you were still in the church?
They would have been very upset.
Wow, that's so interesting that's part of the. Is there like a shunning process, or do people get kicked out or banned, or what would be sort of like a bannable offense?
You would be expelled from the church if there was something they found out that you did something heinously wrong, and then the minister would read a letter at the end of the sermon that so and so has been expelled, and
in front of the whole congregation. Wow. Okay. That's a lot of pressure, isn't it, to form, I suppose.
It's another means of keeping people in line, keeping people adhering to whatever the church administration says.
Is that something that would happen if you just stepped out of line? Would that be brought to the attention of the congregation if you were caught doing something that was seen as against the rules of the church?
I'd imagine, you'd have a talking to at first, and like overseers and ministers would try their best to make sure that your behavior changes for the better of the church. And if that doesn't, then I guess there would be extra steps that would be taken to expel somebody.
It always scares me when ex-Jehovah's Witnesses tell me stories about being called into a room full of elders where they have to talk them through the things that they've done, and then the elders sit there and judge them about their life choices, and it's that makes me feel so uncomfortable when people tell me those stories. So I don't want to be taken into a room and sat down and told off by anybody. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So especially to have my name read off a letter and, you know, say this person is, do you think there's ever a chance that resident ministers or officers would cover up any kind of abuse that happens within the church so that it wouldn't become sort of mainstream knowledge?
I've never heard of any instances like that, at least
'Cause
here in America.
yeah, I'm just drawing a lot of parallels between INC and the Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's certainly something that the JW seem to be very good at.
It's another. Sorry, it's also when I was doing, research about just the timing of these religions. It's just interesting how they both formed around roughly the same time, or like kind of like the same consequences.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you talked a lot about kind of realizing that you can make decisions for yourself, and that since you left, you know, your destiny is your own, I suppose, to dictate. And I just wondered if you did anything in particular to achieve that state of mind, or is that something that's just come naturally over the last 10 years?
I think it's come naturally on top of still meditating and still like trying to reground myself. My friends always call me very balanced and grounded. So I guess it comes with that.
And what advice would you have for others who are thinking of leaving INC, or looking to do some groundwork themselves to change maybe their outlook on things?
It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. It's okay to feel like you want to leave. And it's okay to leave. As simply as I can put it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think that's fantastic. I mean, I just wanted to go back to the subreddit before I ask you if there's anything you think we've missed or anything that you want to add before we finish today. But I just wanted to remind everybody that there is a subreddit that you can go and visit, that I will put into the episode description. There are 11,000 members currently, or just below 11,000 members. There are things posted every day. People will post things about the history of the movement, about their personal experiences. Some people will post asking for advice. Some people will post about their experiences since leaving the movement and being able to kind of have some freedom and some autonomy. So there's lots of stuff available within that subreddit for people to go and access if they feel like they need some support. Then that is definitely there. So I am going to hand it over to you, Guy. Is there anything you want to add, or anything you think we've missed?
I second the use of the subreddit. I am also a frequent visitor of the subreddit, and it has helped me a lot with my journey past the Iglesia de Cristo. Fantastic. Like I stumbled upon it like 5 years ago, and then I learned more about the news of what's going on with the church. For those who don't know, apparently the head, oh god, what's his name? I don't know, but he threw his mom and brother underneath a bus. What's his name? I think it's Eduardo Manalo or whatever, whoever's in charge of the church.
Physically, or just or like
as a figure of speech?
I was gonna say. Okay. And how did he do that?
He expelled his mom and his brother from the church, and that was also another nail in the coffin, or adding more to the nails in the coffin for me. It's like,
interesting.
How could there be a Christian religion that would do that to their own mother?
And why do we know why he did that?
I think they were also being public about speaking out against the church.
Right. Okay. Okay. Interesting. It's interesting that even the closely associated with leadership members of the family have sort of the same perception and thoughts on the movement as you had at the time that you left.
Yeah.
So, is there anything you think would be important for people to know before we say goodbye today, Guy?
Be yourself. I think that's important.
Be authentic, be yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I try and do that authentically on the podcast, as well as maintaining some anonymity, because you never know who might get really upset by the content that we're releasing on the show. So I appreciate you coming here today, Guy, giving me your time and telling us a little bit about INC, a little bit of your personal story. And I know you've got some assignments that you need to be getting on with, so no more procrastinating. It's important to get on with that work, get it done, because you'll feel so much better. And just thank you so much for your time and your story.
Thank you, Casey.
I really hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Guy. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, please do so by emailing me on cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been the Cult Vault.